fine. Thumbs up दिखा देना. ठीक है?
बस हो रहा.
करूं?
कर दो start.
Namaskar. We welcome you to Himalayan Heritage Foundation once again. As you know,
Namaskar, Dr. Mahesh.
Namaskar Mara. We have been going through a series of webinars. Firstly on Kashmir Shaivism and then taking another dimension of Kashmiri Pandit genocide.
Voice is breaking, sir.
Nahi guys, theek. And then ultimately we left to the strategic importance of Himalayas. And today we have with us Dr. Ramesh Tamiri ji. He has been a researcher of a very different kind, working on primary sources, and then having a very different training. He's by profession a doctor, and he knows what healing is all about. And he has not been healing through his profession, but through his writings, by telling the truth, collecting the primary data. And his articles, his papers, and his books, of course, have been based on primary research. That is a wonderful thing about his research. And this narrative building, based on the experiences, has been tremendous, and his research has been quoted in various journals by various authors, various reputed institutes. And we are proud to have him here. And today we'll learn from him and know from him how he exactly started this journey of documenting the exile and then the trauma of exile and ultimately the socio-cultural impact, and then also the kind of, you can see, psychosis on the displaced Kashmiri Pandit community. Dr. Saab, welcome to Himalayan Heritage Foundation, and we'd like to hear from you how you exactly got into this from a very different profession.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh ji, for inviting me here. In 1994, Kashmir Sentinel was started by Parun Kashmir. I began writing for Kashmir Sentinel. Then in the second phase, 1998, I contributed many articles and I had to write a lot on different issues, political, social, cultural issues. Kashmir Sentinel came out with many special issues also. One of these issues was focused on Dr. Brig Premi. During the release function of that special issue, there was a painter artist. He told me that nobody is talking about Mr. Suraj Tikku. Suraj Tikku was a versatile artist. He was a great painter, both in landscape as well as portrait painting. After Kashinath Banji, he was the best portrait painter of Kashmir. He was also a theater actor, and he was a very good set designer. So it set me thinking that that an artist who has such a multifarious talent, nobody talks about him. The state institutions also, they totally ignored him. And then in the context of genocide in 1990, there is echo, Mahesh, there is echo of Mahesh, there is echo.
Just a minute.
Please, please switch off the voice, video voice. It will be clear now.
Is it okay?
Please continue.
Then in the context of genocide, there is danger of cultural effacement also, because the people who pushed us to genocide, they wanted to show that Kashmiri Pandit never existed, never had any link with Kashmir. So they tried to ignore our people and also sought to efface their contributions. I started working on there was no material previously on Suraj Tikku. I started collecting oral history and oral testimonies and prepared a book on him. This Tikku family was quite talented. Their 3 generations have been involved in theater. Then I published this book in 2010. The book received very good reviews, and it was accepted in some universities of West also. Then in the second phase, I started working on the 1947 invasion and how the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus took place in its wake.
Okay. So Dr. Saab, you gave a graphic picture of that book. I have read that book also. That is a wonderful document talking about the progressive role of Kashmiri Pandits in creating a social milieu and everything. And it's the way you presented it.
I also give an overview of the history of painting and history of theatre in Kashmir, so that the readers outside J&K have an idea in what milieu and what context Suraj Tiku excelled as an artist. Then his teacher, Kashinath Banji, about him almost nothing is written. I prepared a full chapter on his biography and his contributions.
Okay. Now you have also mentioned about your work on the tribal invasion, which was basically a Pakistani military assault on the northern frontier of India to create an unrest and then term it as an unfinished agenda of Pakistan, and the rest is history. And you have been working tirelessly in documenting the oral histories and then making them, you can say, refined to be fit into the academic straitjacket and presenting it. You are working tirelessly for so many years, and it's a 2-volume work, as I know you have been working on it. And what approach you have taken in documenting it? Is it only about the invasion into Jammu and Kashmir, or does it document the broader perspective of the atrocities and genocide inflicted on Kashmiri Pandits? What exactly is the structure of the book?
Yes. I lived in Srinagar city. Actually, during this 1947 war invasion, North and Central Kashmir was mostly affected. These areas came under Pakistani occupation. Since our family hailed from Srinagar city, there were not strong memories of atrocities and other privations in the wake of tribal invasion in Srinagar city. So after migration, many of our friends who hailed from North and Central Kashmir, they would often talk about this tribal invasion, what the problems they had to undergo, their atrocities. So I started, I wondered why nobody has written anything on this tribal raid, despite the fact that it is a major genocide in 20th century. I started working on tribal raid at the fall of 1999. I started collecting oral testimonies, interviewing people who had witnessed to the Pakistani occupation. Initially, I thought that I would just have representative testimonies, just 20 or 30 testimonies, and then publish in a book form so that the people have an idea how Kashmiri Pandits face this tribal raid. But then I thought that the real story and the entire story and history can never be communicated through representative testimonies. So my aim was not just to produce a book, just like the people are producing the books on partition. My aim was to record the complete history. So in that case, I shifted from personal testimonies to place narratives. I made a list of all these 250 villages in North and Central Kashmir which faced the Pakistani invasion, and I also prepared a list of research persons who would get me to the people who had seen the who had seen the Pakistani invasion, and then I started recording their testimonies. Then second thing was I also wanted to verify these testimonies. So from a single village or a town, I recorded multiple interviews so that I will have an idea whether people were understating or overstating. Then the real problem which I faced was the employees and other businessmen who were held back, who were trapped in the areas which later on came under the control of Pakistan. These areas included Gilgit, Baltistan, Muzaffarabad, Mirpur, and Kotli. Getting to those people was little difficult, because in the case of North and Central Kashmir, I could easily get the people who would speak directly. But in the case of these frontier districts, I had to do secondary tracing. First, try to find out the people who were held up there, and then those people approach others and find out other people. So I was able to get over 350 testimonies, and I use those testimonies to build a place narrative. I am publishing this in two volumes. Volume 1 that runs into 600 pages, that is focused on Kashmir Valley proper. Then the second volume is based on those frontier districts where Kashmiri Pandits were trapped during those 2 years and were later repatriated by Red Cross. I also managed to get very rare photographs of the victims who fell to the Pakistani bullets. My methodology was that I did not focus only on the atrocities and the privations also. I also tried to find out how this conspiracy of this invasion was organized. It is a misnomer to call it a tribal raid. Tribal raid, these people were Pashtun tribes when the Pakistani invasion force, it comprised both. It comprised Pakistani army soldiers in civils, then tribal levies and Pashtun tribesmen. So these tribesmen were called raiders because of their past history. But 1947 invasion was not a tribal raid. It was a direct war, asymmetric war launched by Pakistan, where they used the foot soldiers of Pashtun tribesmen and other frontier police also.
Oh.
Besides Muslim League volunteers. Actually, Major Khurshid Anwar, he had come from the Muslim Guard, Muslim National Guard.
Okay. So you have given a very graphic account, a chronological thing that it has debunked. Basically, it will be a path-breaking document and one of its kind, where you are quoting oral testimonies and the memories of the people who are still living in second or third generation, and it will change the whole structure of the research. That's wonderful about it.
It also focuses on, because usually we were told that when the entire subcontinent was engulfed in communal violence, Gandhiji saw a ray of hope in Kashmir. So my narrative, based on the oral testimonies of the people who were direct victims, it totally gives a different picture.
Yes, exactly. You have blown into smithereens this myth that that ray of light was there. Basically, Kashmiri Pandits were in a morass. They were caught in this crossfire of this invasion, and still it went on. Now question arises: what was the response of Kashmiri Pandit society to this invasion, this turmoil, and this ultimately we call it Holocaust and genocide in 47 itself that culminated in 1990 in the independent India? What happened to us in the pre-independent India and post? There may be difference, but there is a continuity of genocide. So what was the response of Kashmiri Pandit society and most particularly the Kashmiri Pandit leadership, if it was existing on the ground? What was their role to this onslaught?
First of all, we must accept that 20th century has been a very turbulent century for Kashmiri Hindus, right from 1928 onwards, when the communal politics in Kashmir among Muslims took a lead, and its direct onslaught was faced by us in 1931. That was a simple communal aggression against Kashmiri Hindus. And there was also a determined attempt by the Muslim leadership that Kashmiri Pandit should be economically threatened. They pleaded for reservation in jobs and services on communal basis. Kashmiri Hindus in 1932, under the leadership of Sanatan Dharm Yog Sabha, led a very wise agitation that has come to be known as Roti agitation. I remember my father, who was 5-year-old that time, he used to say that I also participated in that Bal Sabha. So Kashmiri Hindus political line in 1932 agitation was correct and appropriate to the circumstances. And I can say with some confidence that it was one of the reasons that the government that time did not agree to reservation on communal basis. Then the next we come to the 1947. 1947, Kashmiri Pandit leadership could not play a many major role, so far as the onslaught on Kashmiri Hindus was concerned at the hands of Pashtun tribesmen. Kashmiri Pandit community was taken by surprise in the areas which fell to Pakistan. First of all, they could not visualize that the Pakistani invading force, they would behave like savages. They thought that this invading force would straightway go along national highway to capital and they would not be affected. So many Kashmiri Pandits could not or did not leave their places in north and central Kashmir. A part of them, of course, very small section, it left. Second was they thought that Maharaja's army was quite capable to deal with the Pakistanis, but they never visualized that the Pakistani invading force of about 5 to 10,000 Lashkar was led by regular army soldiers. So in that phase where Kashmiri Pandits were caught in north and central Kashmir under Pakistani occupation, Kashmiri leadership could not play any role. That was the objective situation. But in the aftermath of the invasion, Kashmiri Pandit leadership, it was broadly, one was under Sabha. Sabha was not exactly like Yog Sabha. Actually, Kashmiri Pandit leader, Kashabandhu ji, he was part of the national conference, but and so he could not directly associate himself with the Pandit community. So he floated a group of people, and that group of people functioned under a committee that was called Sabha. Second was Gopi Krishan ji. He is Sudhar Samiti. This Kashabandhu ji's that committee, it did commendable work because many Kashmiri Hindus who were killed in 1947, they had been buried and their cremation was the foremost task that was to be done after the Pakistanis were pushed back. Then second major problem to which we have not focused so far was that in the areas which came under Pakistani occupation, Kashmiri Pandits were forcibly converted to Islam. In fact, that sad story has never been told in full detail, and my book deals at length with those issues. So second problem which Sabha volunteers faced was that how to convert these Hindus back to their faith. And in this Kashabandhu ji, he personally visited most of these places, and their members, they performed the cremation of the victims and then helped bring these Kashmiri Pandits back to the Hindu fold, and they gave them confidence that just temporarily converting to Islam does not make them polluted. Third problem was the organization of the relief in Srinagar city. Most of these Kashmiri Pandits, I have an estimate about 30,000 people who had to leave their homes after these Pakistanis were pushed back, because many people had their residential houses subjected to arson, and they shifted to city. In city, we had about 22 relief camps. So organizing the housing, organizing the day-to-day necessities was the work done both by Sudhar Samiti of Dr. Gopi Krishan ji as well as Kashabandhu ji.
So you have brought to four very important points that how this genocide has been undermined. Leave aside 90s, we are still in 47. Now the question arises, when Gandhi and Nehru were so vociferous about the happenings in Noakhali and other parts of India, and we know what happened afterwards, what was the response after the direct action of Muslim League and all other things. What you, as per your research, what has been the role or the perspective of Gandhi and Nehru towards this issue of Kashmiri Pandits in 1947? How the leadership of Congress responded to that? Did they undermine it deliberately, or their whole perspective was wrong towards Kashmir, both Gandhi and Nehru?
I will deal with Gandhi and Nehru separately. In my view, the sort of research work I have done, I personally feel Gandhi was not so much keen about Kashmir. That is what my research work says. But he was certainly quite closer to Sheikh Abdullah and National Conference. In fact, by giving a blank check that Sheikh Abdullah promoted secularism in Kashmir, and in 1947 nothing happened. Gandhi was playing politics the same way the way he played in Mopila. When Dr. Ambedkar said the Hindu atrocities on Hindus and massacres of Hindus in Mopila, Dr. Ambedkar said it was a Bartholomew. Gandhi said nothing happened. So Gandhi's position on Mopla and Kashmir, they were part of the same mindset. Gandhi was what we call as a negationism. He was engaging in denial. Then as far as the Nehru is concerned, Nehru's position was, many people are asking me that was Nehru interested in Kashmir because of his Kashmiri origins? My answer is no. Nehru, there could be possibly three reasons are being usually given why Nehru was so much interested in Kashmir. One is given that he had Kashmiri origin, he had nostalgia for the land of his ancestors. Second reason given is that he was quite unlike other Congress leaders. He was quite sensitive about consolidation of the northern frontier. Then third reason is he wanted to fight two-nation theory. My view is that the question of his Kashmiri origins, I don't think that was the main reason. So second reason, northern frontier, the way Nehru handled the J&K, it does not look to me that he was so much interested in northern frontier, because even there was a proposal that after 1947, why did Indian army stop at Uri only? Why did it not go to Muzaffarabad? My researches indicate that Nehru wanted to take Muzaffarabad, not just because it was part of the erstwhile Maharaja state, but he was more interested in Muzaffarabad because he wanted to give buffer for protection of Kashmir Valley. He was interested in Muzaffarabad. So Nehru's main interest in Kashmir was that he wanted to show that if Kashmir joined India, it would blunt the edge of two-nation theory. But the contradiction is that on one side he was trying to counter Muslim League, but at the other side he was pandering to the Muslim communal politics of Sheikh Abdullah. Now, since Nehru had a very wrong impression that Kashmir could be held only through Sheikh Abdullah. So so in north and central Kashmir, it were the common Muslims who forced Kashmiri Hindus to convert to Islam, and the role of common Muslims, bearing few exceptions, in which we have these nambardars and tenants and just one or two people in each village, the role of common Muslims during 1947 was not good. So on 9th of November, when Nehru went to, on 13th of November, when Nehru went to Baramulla town, he addressed a public gathering. He told the people that I am very happy that local people supported you. There was the few Kashmiri volunteers, they stood up and told him this is wrong. We have been, local people have connived in these atrocities. He was forced out of that gathering. So Nehru's main thing was that this Kashmiri Pandit genocide in 1947, it should not be given publicity.
So, Dr. Saab, you have clearly told that 47 genocide was undermined. Are you hearing me?
Undermined, denied also.
Yes. So that way.
In fact.
Yes.
Yes, please speak.
Yeah, basically it was undermined, and the very important point to underline that the political leadership at that time, whether it was Gandhi or Nehru or the other leaders, they were not sensitive. They were not basically.
They were not interested.
They were not internalizing the northern frontier, importance of northern frontier.
They neither were committed to state building nor nation building. State building, they were not interested. That is why they did not take it that we had to defend the northern frontier. Exactly. Nation building, they were not interested because they thought that Kashmir has to be ruled through Sheikh Abdullah, and the only community to be patronized, cultivated is the Kashmiri Muslim community. In that context, they ignored Jammu Hindus, they ignored Kashmiri Hindus. And in fact, this approach of the government of India, this set the stage for economic, social, political, and physical destabilization of Kashmiri Hindus. So the seeds of destabilization of 1990 should be dialectically traced to 1947 Nehru's Kashmir policy.
Very clear now that it was basically giving an olive branch to creation of Muslim state within the secular democratic India, and that ultimately led to the destabilization. Now, we are coming to one more thing, that this is a genocide in continuity. As you
I like to add two more things.
Yes.
What were the basic foundation stones of this Kashmir policy? One was that Nehru created an autonomous, you can say, semi-autonomous, semi-sovereign Muslim state. Second, it gave the constitutional legitimacy to the creation of a Muslim state in secular India, a state that is funded by government of India but not accountable to it. So
Yes.
this strengthened the separatist consciousness of Kashmiri Muslims. Second thing was the policy of what we call the Muslim presidents. And I have used a particular term for it, the Muslimization, the policy of Muslimization, that Muslims have to be given precedence in all sectors. These two things strengthen the communal consciousness and the creation of Muslim separatist consciousness. So the twin politics of communalization and secessionization, it sowed the seeds for destabilization of Kashmiri Hindus.
So it was all grand design of Muslim presidents that was given priority. Now, we are seeing this when we compare 47 and 1990. What is the difference or similarity between the 1947 and 1990 genocides of Kashmiri Pandits?
This is a very important question. There are certain similarities and there are certain dissimilarities. Similarities are that it was an asymmetric war that time also waged through under the cover of irregulars, and in 1990 also same. Second thing is that the ideological paradigm is also same, raising the religious cry of jihad. That was in 1947 and in 1990 also. Then targets chosen, the non-Muslims. It was in 1947 also and in 1990 also. But there is a difference. In 1947, the role of Kashmiri Muslims, some of them were collaborators, some people played good role also. But in 1947, the level of communalization was not as much as it was in 1990. That is a very important point. And the 99 communalism was reaction. It was not as deep-seated as it was in 90. Then that communalism of 1947 was more in reaction to the mass hysteria created by the invasion of Pakistan. Then second, in 1947, there was not so much focus on the killings as much as on the conversion. In 1990, there was focus on killings also, and then of course conversion was not the issue. Main issue was to throw the community out. So this is the main difference. Then in 1947, the role of government, because that time if National Conference would have created a situation of extreme communal tension, then the government of India would not have been able to help it out. So government in certain cases, they helped the creation of these refugee relief camps, though those were organized by the Kashmiri Pandit organizations only. But at least the government had to address certain issues. And in 1990, as we saw in 1990, the government was totally insensitive. Totally insensitive. After 30 years also, our basic problems are not being addressed. We still continue to be called migrants, displaced people. It's a genocide.
Exactly. So for 1990, things complicated as already subversion has penetrated into the state and it facilitated through fifth column and other things. It's rightly observed. Now, one more important question is that this destabilization and all things, we have a very, very important historical event in Kashmiri Pandit Renaissance. That was 1967 agitation. That changed the discourse in the community. It made them aware of the fault lines, their position vis-a-vis the communal majority. And how do you see 1967 agitation? Then why did 1967 agitation, which galvanized the Kashmiri Pandits as a force, as a people who were aware of their rights to rife and limb, then why did 67 agitation fail? And what was its impact in the broader psyche of the Kashmiri Pandits?
basic thing is what were the causes behind the 1967 agitation? As we already said that in 1947 the policy of Muslimization of state services started. So very few jobs were being given to Kashmiri Pandits up to 1953. After 1953 dismissal of Sheikh Abdullah, government of India, they put in lot of funds, and Bakshi was not as communal as Sadiq, Sheikh Abdullah and others were. So Bakshi's age was age of plenty, where 10 Kashmiri Muslims were recruited, 3-4 Kashmiri Hindus were also recruited. So discrimination was not acute during Bakshi's time. And besides that, he was a organization leader also. He had his own social constituency, social base. The problem was different with Ghulam Muhammad Sadiq. Ghulam Muhammad Sadiq, despite his strong pro-Indian stand, he had no social base. He was a very poor organization leader. So what he started, he fell back to cultivating a Muslim constituency. And to cultivate that Muslim constituency, he took a number of measures. One was that is infamously called 70-30, where 70% jobs are to be given to the Hindus of the state and 30% the Muslims of the state and 30% to the Hindus. And Kashmiri Pandits started facing acute discrimination. There was tremendous unrest because of this policy. Second reason was that 1976 communal land reforms which came during Mir Qasim's time. Actually, I have come across evidence recently which says that this survey was done in 1968-69, that if Kashmiri Hindus who live beyond 14 kilometers, if they get deprived of this land, how many people will lose land? So what 1976, the communal land reforms of Mir Qasim, the groundwork was laid during Sadiq's time. Then this acute economic discrimination during Sadiq's time, it created the background for 1967 agitation. Then there was also the issue of where a Kashmiri Pandit girl was forcibly married. So that was the immediate trigger. But the main issue that time was the economic marginalization and economic communal discrimination that they were facing during the Sadiq's government. What the Kashmiri Pandit leadership of the time, I personally feel, because truth should always be spoken for our younger generation, we did not have a leadership that was really, you can say, foresighted. The issue was that our struggle against the economic discrimination, it had to be a long-term one. By mixing this struggle with the issue of the girl, it created a situation that in which the government, there were two problems. Actually, by linking the issue of the economic discrimination, which was to be fought on a long-term basis, with the issue of the forcible marriage of the girl, Pandit leadership was caught in a strange situation. And around the same time, there was a factional struggle within Congress also, between the Qasim lobby and between the Sadiq lobby. So this Pandit agitation, this got linked with that struggle also. And when the Sadiq group emerged stronger, they crushed the agitation with a heavy hand. This demoralized Kashmiri Pandit community, and then more organized discrimination was started by the Sadiq regime. In fact, the first major exodus of Kashmiri Hindus after 1947 started after the Sadiq regime began hunting these Kashmiri Pandit activists of 1967 agitation. So many people who came to Jammu from Srinagar, they came immediately after that agitation fizzled out, and it also demoralized Kashmiri Pandit community. From 1967 to 1986, Kashmiri Pandit leadership and the community was so demoralized that it could hardly challenge Sheikh Abdullah's communal policies after 1977.
So this is very important, that what triggered that Kashmiri Pandit genocide, religious cleansing has been a continuous phenomenon. It is a stage-wise, step-wise, well-calibrated move on the basis of communalization, as you rightly said, Muslimization of Kashmiri milieu. So now the question is, this you saw that the first, basically in the modern times, 67 triggered a displacement of Pandits. Now, what really led to the religious cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits in 1990? What were the exact causes as per your research? And one more important thing, could it have been avoided? What is your opinion on that?
I think this question needs to be answered in two parts. One is the 1990 part, that is the final part. Pakistan's soon after Pakistan launched a plan that is called as Afghan pipeline, diversion of Afghan pipeline. It 1980 in my researches indicate that Pakistan's plan to destabilize Kashmir, it started around 1982. We have an evidence, of course circumstantial, that that hundreds of Kashmiris were recruited at the fall of 1982. Second thing is, so in that Pakistani's plan of destabilization Kashmir, ethnic cleansing was a key component. Second thing was then Sheikh Abdullah's role, National Conference role. 1977, Sheikh Abdullah, after coming to power for a second time, he had, of course, he was swearing his loyalty to the government, but the policies he was pursuing, they were creating a situation where communalism, secessionism, and fundamentalism were being strengthened, and those elements were gaining ground. For example, in 1982, they came out with a resettlement bill. Then in 19 this many Kashmiri youth, they went across for training. Then National Conference and Jamaat Islami, there was convergence of there were convergence in their campaign, which was anti-Pandit, anti-Indian. So these two things. One was the Pakistan's game plan to subject Kashmiri Hindus to ethnic cleansing, and second was the communalization, the radicalization, and secessionization in Kashmir. These two factors, both these factors equally played a part in the physical ethnic cleansing of 1990. Pakistan's selective killings would not have led to Pandit exodus had there not been previous communalization and radicalization of the Kashmiri Muslim society, and also dysfunctional state which emerged in Kashmir. The state collapsed. In the face of Pakistani assaults or growing communalization, if the state administration would have continued to behave as an administration which was sensitive to the security needs of the people, there would have been no exodus. So it was the collapse of the state machinery which also became a major factor in the final ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Hindus in 1990.
So it is very clear that there was a total collaboration of various segments, and in which civil society, in which media, in which other segments, they collaborated. And even the national media, the local vernacular press, they were collaborators. So how did the different governments handle this Kashmiri Pandit issue post 1990? What you see? Do you see there is a continuity in the policy towards the Kashmiri Pandits, or there is some change? What do you see?
So far as Kashmir policy is concerned, we have the view of the state, we have the view of the political class. I find that there was broadly agreement on the Nehruvian policy, where the state has to engage in denial of discrimination, atrocities, and ethnic cleansing of Hindus in the state in general and Kashmiri Pandit in particular. Secondly, since the Indian state and the political culture was still informed by Nehruvian consensus, so if they would admit to the ethnic cleansing as a genocide, it would break that consensus. So the attempt was that there is forced displacement, there were Kashmiri Pandits were threatened, they chose migration because they wanted to be just secure. So national media had two roles. One was it was dominated by left and liberals, and second was that government policy was trying to underplay this exodus. Then they continue by categorizing us only as people who are displaced just because there was terrorist violence. They never undertook the factor that it was a genocide which led to Kashmiri Hindus ethnic cleansing. Genocide is a political act. Genocide, you cannot rehabilitate people back in valley unless you recognize that genocide is a political act, and there has to be a political solution. I think all governments are virtually taking the same position despite the two important steps taken by the Modi government in 2009, where they have dismantled the Islamic State, 2019, where they have dismantled the Islamic State, semi-autonomous Islamic State, but many more things are to be done. And the most important thing is to categorize Pandits as victims of ethnic cleansing, of genocide. Unless you factor that into strategies for resettlement, I don't think there can be any end to this genocide, or Kashmiri Hindus can be rehabilitated back in Valley.
This is very important thing that you have said. What we can conclude from it is that there has been a political consensus across left, right, and center of Indian political spectrum to trivialize this genocide, and you have rightly underlined it. Now, very important question, since that we had a kind of a simmering in the society and we were facing the brunt, and you have established this with your research, with your arguments, which are primary, well documented, that there is a continuous genocide and which has been trivialized now. So the question is, how did the Kashmiri Pandit community leadership and the community as a whole respond to this genocide in 1990 in the post-independent India? That's a very shameful act because it happened in the post-independent India. So what was the response of Kashmiri Pandit community and the Kashmiri Pandit leadership to this genocide in 1990?
In 1990, we had traditional leadership and we had new leadership. Traditional leadership was totally, it just spoke about genocide in vague terms as if it was simply a Hindu-Muslim conflict. Secondly, it did not come out with a blueprint for ending the state of genocide. Third, it had no idiom or a narrative to sensitize national opinion to the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus. This set the younger members of the community thinking that we had to have a new idiom, we had to reassess what actually was a problem, then what could be the roadmap for ending this state of genocide. So younger members initially, they were under the aegis of Sahitya Samiti. They came out with that there should be a territorial zone where Kashmiri Pandits could be well protected. Finally, this idea later on grew into a bigger political roadmap, and that has come to be called Margdarshan Resolution in December 1990. That was a historic moment for Kashmiri Hindus. Kashmiri Pandit leadership, I can say, that came of age in 1991. It was no more content with talking about that we'll go back with security and dignity. It was talking of political right. It was talking of end to genocide. It was questioning Kashmir policy. It was questioning the country's political culture, the political class. It was also questioning the compromises with Pakistan, that despite Pakistan's continuous incitement to jihadist terrorism, the government of India still continues talking and holding and having diplomatic relationship with it. So the entire gamut of issues that was connected with our genocide and that was connected with the terrorism in Kashmir was challenged by the Kashmiri Pandit leadership of Pann Kashmir. I call Pann Kashmir a sort of a rebirth for the Kashmiri Hindu community. Pann Kashmir challenged discourse at three levels. It shifted the discourse that Kashmiri Pandits' ethnic cleansing was not simply a communal conflict. It said that it was a genocide and you had to deal it as a genocide. Second thing was that it said that this genocide of Kashmiri Hindus just before 1990 was as much due to Pakistanis as due to the faulty Kashmir policy. The faulty Kashmir policy of Government of India is strengthened the communal forces, the radicalization forces, Salafist forces, and also the separatist forces. So unless this policy of the second element of the Kashmir policy was that you just continue Kashmiri Sunni Muslims, you continue to patronize, it will bring peace. Kashmiri Hindus said no, the people who are part of the problem cannot be part of the solution unless a new politics emerges in Kashmir that is committed to pluralism, that is committed to participatory democracy, that is committed to tolerance. There can be no redressal of the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus. Third thing was that Kashmiri Hindus, they said unless the Pakistani terrorism, unless India raises political and other costs for Pakistan, terrorism in Kashmir will not end. Then lastly, Kashmiri Hindus took a very strong stand on the regional mainstream parties. Regional mainstream parties, Pann Kashmir has been using a particular word for them, that they are half separatists. And finally, it is vindication of Pann Kashmir's stand that in government, that government of India in 2019, they virtually took a similar stand. 3 chief ministers had to be put under arrest. So ultimately, the Pann Kashmir's political line on all these issues is being vindicated. And then lastly, Pann Kashmir said that no political rights can be enforced unless Kashmiri Hindus have territorialized themselves. So historically also we have seen that the communities which are subjected to historical persecution, they have been able to survive in their homeland only by getting regionalized. That is by having a territory where they form a majority. Political rights can be enforced only in that situation.
So this is a very important point and a very not only relevant, a revolutionary point indeed, that Margdarshan resolution was not only a Kashmiri Pandit doctrine, it had all elements of national security doctrine, all elements of reorganization.
Precisely. I say that Pann Kashmir is not only a solution to the perpetual homelessness and genocide of Kashmir Hindu, it is a solution for permanent durable peace in Kashmir.
And it also underlines that how important is the northern frontier, how it has to be Sanskritized so that India has to stop the balkanizing forces. And number two, that this Margdarshan resolution was a consensual document in which people from cross-section of ideologies from the community and the organizations gave their consent. It was a unanimous document that led to the demand of homeland. So now what you see in the broader perspective, if I ask you, how has been Pann Kashmir different from all other organizations and all other so-called, you can say, proxy parties, and how it has stopped the march of fifth column and subversives to destroy the Kashmiri Pandit cause and the national cause in Jammu and Kashmir, and for that matter in Kashmir?
Pann Kashmir, I think Pann Kashmir leadership, it operates with a clear mind. It based and takes due cognizance of the ground realities. Second thing is, in a genocide, the four processes are at work. One is the immediate destabilization. Second is the cultural effacement. Third and the fourth things are very important. Third is the incomprehension. If the members of the victimized community or its leadership does not have a proper comprehension of the issues involved, both with respect to the direct threats to communities, social cohesion, cultural identity, and also the threats which emerge from the regional or the national politics, it cannot address these issues. Then last is the betrayal. A section of the community is used by the elements who are hostile to the Kashmiri Hindu community to create an alternate narrative and just to create a situation where the government abandons the Kashmiri Hindus. So in that sense, we can see that while other groups, at least the literature I have read or followed the other groups, I think they don't take due cognizance. Whereas Pann Kashmir has a clear blueprint what needs to be done to handle Pakistan, the local mainstream parties, the Salafist or Wahhabi forces in the Kashmir Valley, then how Kashmiri Pandits can return on a sustainable basis with fully restored rights and with no future threat of refoulement. So Pann Kashmir has been different, and it will not be big to say that if there is a Pandit question today, it is because Pann Kashmir exists.
Exactly.
And by maintaining the political visibility on our genocide, even after 30 years, the entire credit goes to the Pann Kashmir leadership, which is seized of the different issues and also the destabilizing narratives which are floated by the people who have either incomprehension or who engage in fifth columnist activities against the Pandit community.
So, Dr. Saab, now I will take a different take now. What has been the response of you call Hindu India or the so-called Hindu nationalists or other basically mainstream parties in India who say that there is a problem in Kashmir? They see it as a persecution of the Hindu minorities. What has been the response of Hindu India to the Kashmiri Pandit question?
By and large, Hindu India and Hindu nationalists have been very supportive of the Kashmiri Hindus. They have taken a stand that Kashmiri Hindus have been subject to genocide. But unfortunately, when it comes to taking measures for reversal of this genocide, for ending this genocide, they do not have clear perspectives. For example, they will just talk about that once the terrorism is off, terrorism is handled, Kashmiri Pandits can automatically return. They don't understand that the issue of genocide, it requires an entirely different treatment. So far as the non-Hindu nationalist segment of the political opinion is concerned, that is I should say that continues to be insensitive to the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus.
So, what has been the role of BJP, which is supposed to be a party which is a right-wing party, and what has been the role of RSS and its functionaries in dealing with this narrative after the regime change in the center in 2014? How do you see their role towards this question, Kashmiri Pandit question?
I think there are two parts, because I already said that one is the Kashmir policy. How Kashmiri Pandit issue is addressed depends as much on Kashmir policy in general, and second thing is policy towards Kashmiri Pandits as subset of that Kashmir policy. Now, if the Kashmir policy, we have to see whether the government has really broken consensus with the Nehruvian Kashmir policy. Up to 2019, we had all indications that Modi government was following virtually the same policy which was followed earlier. But after 2019, partly driven by its own experience and partly because the leadership was also on certain security issues. After all, BJP has been in power for only 10, 12 years. And they had the previous experience of this Vajpayee era, how Kashmir policy at that time was counterproductive, and also the Modi ji's first 4 years from 2014 to 2018. So government then started taking a different approach on the Kashmir policy. I think that Kashmir policy addresses half of our problem by dismantling the state which was encouraging communalism, secessionism, internal subversion. We are part of the Kashmir policy that suits Kashmiri Pandits resettlement and end of genocide. But the second part is our actual resettlement and also the rights. That part we are still waiting for the government. We don't know if the government has any clear view on that, short term or long term. We are still the only thing could be guesswork, and I don't want to make any guesses on that.
Exactly. So after this neutralization of 370 and 35A, there has been a difference between de facto and de jure Muslim state, and you rightly said that there is a paradigm shift towards Kashmir, but let us see how Modi government internalizes it in terms of it. Now, one more important point is that basically it is a kind of a question that rises from a common man, that what will be the new Kashmir policy, or rather not Kashmir policy, what should be the imperative of government of India in terms of addressing this Kashmiri Pandit issue? As you said, that Panun Kashmir has a Margdarshan document, and it has stood the test of the time, and most of the decisions which are being implemented now in terms of reorganization, neutralization of 370. So do you think in the coming days or coming years, the events will lead to the automatic this kind of a change in Indian political mindset? When there is a national debate, we hope so, it is leading towards that resettlement of Kashmiri Pandits will have to be addressed only through the blueprint of Margdarshan. Do you see a change in that narrative?
I cannot say with certainty whether it will happen or how soon it will happen. There are three things. One is the terrorism. I think government's broader policy on terrorism is adequate. They are handling the things. They have blocked the people, the funding of the terrorism. They have stopped these mass funerals. They are also acting against the overground workers. I think that part is being addressed well. Second is the political part. Political part is the what role these half separatist regional mainstream organizations will have. I then also partly linked with that is the administration. I think at administration level, government is doing very well. They are creating a new administration which is sensitive to the security needs of the Indian state and also the local situation also. About the political part, so far as the regional mainstream parties are concerned, we have mixed signals.
Okay.
Where mixed signals, sometimes we see that the government is understanding that bringing these people back again into the political theater would be counterproductive, but at the same time we see contradictory signals. So we'll have to wait and see what whether the government tries to recycle the old people, the people who have been indirectly or directly responsible for the situation of affairs in Kashmir, or whether the government goes for a major step, that is introducing new politics and new faces. In fact, it will be the new politics that will create new faces. So far, we don't have any clue on that. So far, we don't have any signal on that. Whether the present Modi government is will bring new politics in Kashmir, and that will create new faces where people are convictionally pro-Indian, where people are convictionally secular, non-communal. What I have been always emphasizing in my interactions with the scholars, I have been telling them that unfortunately is that the common notion at the Indian academia, civil society, at the government level is that a man who is pro-Indian in Kashmir, Kashmiri Muslims, is automatically secular also. The experience tells us a different thing. So we have to create a situation, we have to create a new politics where average Kashmiri in Kashmir is Indian as well as secular also at the same time. In fact, that is the major guarantee for return of Kashmiri Hindus, for restoration of pluralism, and for restoration of peace also. So third thing is the actual resettlement part. Actual resettlement part in the before the Modi government, Congress, UPA governments and others, in fact, they have been seeking consent for the return model from people like Saifuddin Soz, from Sheikh Abdullah, from this Dr. Farooq Abdullah, the people who have been directly or indirectly responsible for our destabilization. So how would they advise a model which would facilitate our durable return? So after the Modi government came, initially they said we create an area where Kashmiri Hindus will be a majority, so that there is no element of insecurity and where their social, economic and political rehabilitation can take place. But unfortunately, we still do not know what ultimately the government will decide. We'll have to wait for that, and we have to sensitize the national opinion that only the creation of a single area, Panun Kashmir, Pandits can return on a durable basis. And I think the last 1 year we have been actively working on that in sensitizing the national opinion. And the good thing is what you talked about, the pressure on the national political ruling leadership, is that there is a parallel Hindu reaffirmation movement also. So that Hindu reformation movement, which caters to the needs and the discrimination of people in Hindu majority regions also and Hindu minority regions also, that will finally put pressure on the ruling political leadership to create a situation where Kashmiri Hindus can resettle in Valley on a permanent basis with fully restored rights.
And one more thing is that there is a lot of question when people who are not participative in this whole struggle and all that, they keep on questioning that there is no unity, so-called unity in the Pandits. Basically, in fact, Margdarshan resolution gave the political idiom and narrative and a sense of unity to the community. And now, what do you say about this so-called unity is the problem, and what are the challenges before the Kashmiri Pandits? It is a
Uh,
myth actually. What do you say?
Yes, yes. Uh, Actually, historically, we see people identify with ideas, not with the organization. So, if the idea is good, people associate with the ideas. This unity, first of all, we have to understand the groups which are based on the community, and those groups who can say counterfeit groups. So, who were the people who floated these groups and why? Many of these groups were created by the people who were hostile to Pandits. They wanted that the community leadership or the community based leadership should never focus on the actual needs of the community. So, by creating these counterfeit groups, they wanted to claim that since the Kashmiri Pandits are not united, so whom the government would talk to? The question is, it is governments and the Indian states' responsibility to address the problems of the Kashmiri Pandits in the wake of genocide. What are they to do with the multiplicity of groups? So this unity, unfortunately, a besieged community, when it cannot fight an external enemy. Freud in the great psychologist talks about a thing that is called as anti-hero attitude. When you cannot fight external enemy, you try to invent an internal enemy. And who could be the internal enemy? Then the leadership, you can say a failed leadership. So this unity bogey is being used to create a situation to abandon Pandits.
Exactly. So this is basically those
And
people
they
who
are
say,
not interested, and the people who are talking about unity are not interested in unity. They are interested in unity politics to create a situation for abandoning Pandits.
exactly. So these are the people who basically want unity of heads so that there is squandering and obfuscation of the genocide and give margin to those people who can diffuse it and just basically marginalize the Pandits for their own good.
Yes.
Now the question is, will the Pandits return? Number two, and will this jihadist movement, which is basically a pan-Islamic movement for Darul Islam all over the world, whole world has witnessed. It's not a law and order problem as it was being projected. It has spread to the rest of India now. We are witnessing it even today. We see how subversion is taking place in New Delhi and how proxy groups are working for the balkanization of the nation. So, do you see that government of India will be equipped to make Pandits return and basically uphold the place consciousness of Kashmir by defeating the jihad in Kashmir? What do you see?
The same debate also took place among Jews. There were two categories of Jews: Occidental Jews and Oriental Jews. Many people were saying similar things, whether the Jews will return to the promised homeland. The same situation is about Kashmiri Hindus also. We are being told that since Kashmiri Hindus, they are spread all over the globe, since they are settled in jobs, they will not return. The question is that in a globalized world, a person can work in any corner of the world, but his home can be his real homeland. So in that situation, you must have seen many people, Kashmiri Hindus, when there was this package proposal, thousands of Kashmiri Hindus, despite all the adverse conditions which were against their stay, they still went. Second thing is that the fact that Jammu continues to be a major diaspora post-exile, and the main reason is that the Kashmiri Hindus, they see that one day they will be able to return to their Kashmir. So I personally feel if the government of India is sincere, if the political class is sincere, Kashmiri Hindus will go back. The people who have to do jobs, they will do jobs in other places, but they will continue to regard and continue to live in Kashmir the way the Kashmiri Muslims work in different parts of the world. If the Kashmiri Muslims can work in the West in different countries, but still they take Kashmir as their homeland, their home, the same way Kashmiri Hindus, that applies to Kashmiri Hindus also. Then second thing, what was your second question?
I said that will government of
Jihadi movement,
India?
yes,
Yes,
Jihadi movement. Jihadi movement in Kashmir is not simply a local jihadi movement.
exactly.
It has regional and it has global linkages also. So unless there is defeat of the jihadist movement at regional and global levels, the political component of the jihadism in Kashmir cannot be tackled. But second thing is, so far we see that jihadis organizations or the Salafist organizations, they continue to operate in Kashmir and have good reach in the political parties and the administrative circles also. Government can certainly take effective measures to deny them this reach. So I think with more imaginative measures, this part of the jihadist movement in Kashmir can be defeated. And secondly, the government of India is of course doing very well by raising the political costs and military costs for Pakistan. And maybe in a more favorable situation, Pakistan, bogged down by its own internal problems and global isolation, may be forced to exit itself from Kashmir. So that can be only in the realm of speculation. Nothing definite can be said on that account.
Oh, really? You have underlined very important points and finer points, I must say, microscopic and macroscopic also, and that how community has to be on the community level. The community has to be conscious of victim collaborators, fifth columnists, I call bounty hunters, and I will use the strongest word called quislings. And we have to be cautious of these people who are squandering and obfuscating the genocide and just acting as the overground arm and mercenaries of these jihadis or the subversives. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab,
Thank
for
you very much.
this freewheeling talk and how you started the narrative with your research, the primary documentation you are coming out with, and then how you made that Kashmiri Pandit genocide is not the thing of 90, it is a continuous genocide. It has a roots in prior to 1990, prior to 47, in pre-independence era, post-independence era, it has two dimensions, and it leads to, it's basically the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits is a part of bigger game plan of Jihad to desanskritize Kashmir, destabilize or dismantle northern frontier of India. So I wish you all the best for your upcoming 2 volumes of books, which will be a very important document, not only for policymakers, but for the common people of India to understand what actually ails this country, the consciousness of this country to look as a country. Thank you very much for sparing your time and being very candid and very forthright. I hope this interview will go down in history as a blueprint for the policymakers, intelligentsia, scholars to take references from. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share my views here. Thank you once again.
Namaskar, Mother. Namaskar.
Namaskar.